video is about quadratic problem solving. So I'm going to go through 3 word problems for you that are similar to the ones on your homework assignment. The length of a rectangle is 6 inches more than its width. The area of the rectangle is 91 square inches. Let's find the dimensions. So when it's asking us to find dimensions, that means find the length, find the width. Right now, all we know is that the length is 6 inches more than the width. I would like to start by saying, let x represent the width in this problem, and therefore the length, because we know that the length is 6 inches more than that, would be x plus 6, or 6 plus x. So now I've established that the width is x and the length is x plus 6. The other information given to us is the area of the rectangle. We know area is length multiplied by width. So we can set up our equation using that information. The width multiplied by the length equals the area of the rectangle. And here we have a quadratic equation. How do I know it's quadratic? Well, when I distribute this x, I'm going to end up with an x squared somewhere in here. So distribute your x, and then we're going to apply one of the quadratic equation solving methods that we've learned. And that's the easiest part. So the hardest part really is writing the equation correctly. So to solve these, we're going to put it in order so that it looks more familiar to us. And we're going to move the 91 over. And we're going to analyze the quadratic equation that we have here and see if we can solve it by factoring, because that's usually our fastest way if it's possible. Nothing is going to multiply to make negative 91 that adds up to 6. And since we can't solve it by factoring, we can use one of the other methods like completing the square or the quadratic formula. So let's try completing the square for this one, because I see that there's nothing in front of the x squared. And the middle term is even. So I'm going to add my own c value to both sides. Finding c by doing half of 6 to the second power. Half of 6 is 3. 3 to the second power is 9. Back to the left side. It's always going to be something to the second power because it's the same thing twice. And add the numbers together on the right. And then we'll use square roots to solve. The square root of 100 is plus or minus 10. Right? I did the square root of 100 and I got plus or minus 10. So our two possible answers for x are x plus 3 equals positive 10 or x plus 3 equals negative 10. We're going to solve both of these, but only one of them makes sense. This is not my length and my width here. Obviously, we couldn't have negative 13. The negative 13 is one of the possible answers for x, but it doesn't make sense in the context of this word problem. So since I just found x, and I wrote way up at the top that x represented the width, I know that the width is 7 inches. And it also asked us to find the length, because it said find both dimensions. And it told us the length was 6 more than the width. So 7 plus 6 is 13. Now it just happens to be the same as this number that we canceled out, but it's not always going to be that way. So don't ever include the negative answer when you're talking about the length or the width, because negative answers make no sense. You're going to have to go back to the original problem and calculate the other missing piece based on the x value you got that makes sense. So the second example, we've got product of 2 consecutive odd integers. Wow, that's complicated. Product means multiplication. So that's how we're going to end up with something quadratic again. And then 2 consecutive odd integers. If you think about consecutive numbers like 3, 4, 5, 6. So consecutive means one after the other after the other. But consecutive odd integers would be like 3, 5, 7, 9, and so on. If we're going to say that x represents our first integer, which is always what you should do when you have these integer problems. Let x be the first one. The next consecutive odd integer after that, so let's just pretend, for example, that x was the number like 7. Then the next consecutive odd integer after 7 would be 9. And how do we get from a 7 to a 9? We add 2 to that. So if you think about how do you get from one odd number to the next odd number, well, you would add 2. So if x is the first integer, then x plus 2 is the next odd integer. So now we've defined what our x is, and we've defined what the next one is, which is the x plus 2. And then it tells us the information that we're going to use to write our equation. So the product of these two things is 1 less than 4 times the sum. So I'm just going to follow the order of this sentence and write my equation. The product, so I'm going to multiply them. The product of these two integers is, there's my equal sign, 1 less than, remember that that minus 1 goes at the end, 4 times their sum, which would look like this. 4 times the sum, because sum means addition. So I've set up my whole equation. Now it's my task to simplify it and solve it. So distribute over here. Get these simplified, distributed. Keep simplifying. This still says x squared plus 2x. It's quadratic. I'm going to get everything to the left and see if I can factor this one. X squared, oh, let's subtract the 8x here. So 2x minus 8x minus 6x. And let's subtract the 7 also. It says equals 0. So let's see if I can factor it. So is there anything that multiplies to make negative 7 that adds up to negative 6? I do believe that there is. So I don't have to use one of those other fancy methods. I can just factor it into minus 7 and positive 1, which means that the two solutions would be positive 7 or negative 1. Now these are both odd integers. So it's possible in a scenario like this that both of these are going to be x. So we've actually got two possible answers to this question. So if x equals the first integer, we just determined that it could either be 7 or it could be negative 1. In which case, the next odd integer after 7 would be 9, and the next odd integer after negative 1 would be, if you added 2 to that, positive 1. So we've actually got two sets of answers here. It could be 7 and 9, or it could be negative 1 and positive 1. And then we have an application of our Pythagorean theorem here. The hypotenuse of a right triangle is 6 more than the shorter leg. So if we draw a right triangle, we call this one the shorter leg, and the hypotenuse is 6 more than that. The longer leg is 3 more than the shorter leg, so we can call it 3 plus x. And then we're going to find the length of the shorter leg. So basically what we're finding here is just x. So because we know this is a right triangle, we're allowed to apply the Pythagorean theorem. So we're just going to insert in place of A, we're going to put our x. In place of B, we're going to put 3 plus x. Make sure you're doing that in parentheses. And in place of C, we're going to put 6 plus x. Please remember when you've got something in parentheses squared like this, you can't just distribute that exponent, make it 9 plus x squared. It means that you have to write it twice and use FOIL. This is good practice for expansion from earlier in this unit. So it gets a little bit uglier before it gets pretty again. So let's FOIL this. It's going to be 9 plus 6x plus 6 squared. Let's FOIL this. It will be 36 plus 12x plus x squared. And then we're going to get everything on the left side and see if this quadratic equation can be factored. So I've got like terms here. You combine those. I'm also going to put this in order while I'm at it. Make it look a little more familiar. I'll put this one in order too. Oops, I'll show the x next to it. So plus 12x plus 36. Get everything on the left. So we're going to subtract x squared. We're going to subtract 12x. Now we're going to subtract 36. And on the left side, we will have a single x squared, a minus 6x, a minus 27, now it says equals 0. Check to see if you can factor it. I'm hopefully picking numbers that you can factor. We're going to put minus 9 and positive 3 in here. That adds up to negative 6. Solve each of these pieces. Go back up to your question and see if both of these answers make sense or if only one of them does. Because x represented the length of the side of a triangle, the negative answer does not make sense. And therefore the length of the shorter leg, which was x, is just 9. And that is all.